a rose-colored Mediterranean dawn, has been announcing the beginning of day on this island for thousands of years. But those who have witnessed the sun ascending have not always been Italian, or even truly Sicilian. Almost from the birth of civilization, voyagers from seafaring lands, many with conquest in mind, have found the jewel that is Sicily an irresistible prize. Greeks, Romans, Byzantines, Arabs, Normans, Iberians, even Central Europeans were each in their turn conquerors and rulers of Sicily. So her culture is like an enticing antipasto, a delicious blend of superb ingredients. Whatever powerful and mysterious forces raised this volcanic isle above the sea, they surely endowed Sicily with a uniquely stark and dramatic beauty. Yes, this is part of Italy, but the island's unique past also makes Sicilia very much a land unto itself. Its language and even its music reflect the island's varied cultural heritage. Access to the island is frequently by sea, through the ancient port of Messina at the northeast tip of the island, just 5 kilometers from the mainland of Italy. Ships have entered this very port for almost 3,000 years. Now, a golden Madonna offers its benediction to those who both enter and depart. The town was originally given the name Zancle or Sickle by Greek colonists in the 8th century BC because of the remarkable curvature of its harbor. As a great trading center, Messina became a cultural crossroads as well. Artifacts and ideas from the entire world were freely exchanged here. Unfortunately, it is now hard to find very much that reflects Messina's ancient glory. For like most cities on Sicily's east coast, it was decimated by earthquakes on more than one occasion. The last time, in 1908, 90% of the town was destroyed. There were more than 60,000 casualties. Life on Sicily has always been precarious. As a result, Sicilians tend to be somewhat fatalistic and to leave the future in the hands of God. It is mainly from Messina that ships depart to take visitors to the stunningly dramatic Aeolian Islands. A volcanic archipelago of 7 islands, the Aeolians are generally untamed places that the Greeks named after Aeolus, the unpredictable and tempestuous god of the winds. Vulcan was the Roman god of fire, who released molten earth from his foundry far below the earth's crust. These days, the crater on Vulcano appears dormant, but don't be deceived. It rumbles and erupts when least expected, spewing fiery boulders high in the air. This island, with its coastline of steep rocky crags, emerges abruptly from the sea, making Stromboli the least welcoming and perhaps the most impressive of all the Aeolians. The square white houses of San Vincenzo stand at the foot of mighty Stromboli. When she does erupt, the lava flows down to the sea just to the west of town. Lipari is the largest and most densely populated of the islands. The nearest port on the return to Sicily, less than an hour from Vulcano, is ancient Milazzo, whose long jetty points like a finger directly out at the Aeolians and has for over 2,000 years. Milazzo's strategic position meant that it was fought over many times and inhabited by various peoples. The main fortification, which overlooks both sides of the Long Cape, was begun by Arabs in the 10th century on what had been a Greek acropolis. In typical Sicilian manner, the Spanish added to the fortress centuries later. One of the most modern developments on this ancient island is a system of highways or autostradas that makes travel to cities throughout Sicily swift and easy. Motoring to Cefalù allows us to follow the rocky Turanian coastline westward. Once a small fishing village of Greek origin at the base of an immense limestone promontory, the medieval old town is an intriguing labyrinth of winding streets with crooked and narrow passageways. The heights of La Rocca, which sits like a throne high above Cefalù, offers a panorama of the long Turanian coastline. A paradiso for vacationers. Along the coast, halfway between Cefalù and Palermo, is Termini Immerse, famous since antiquity for its therapeutic hot springs. Phoenicians founded Sicily's largest city in the 7th century BC and called it Giz, which means flower, because it lies at the foot of a fertile inland plain. The Romans called it Panoramus, or the large port. But the Golden Age really began under the Arabs, who called the city Balharm, which in time became Palharm, or Palermo. The Norman French ruled Palermo in the 13th century from this ancient fortress. They were so despised by the people that their inability to pronounce Sicilian properly earned them the name Tartaglioni, or stutterers. Eventually, a revolt against the French spread throughout Sicily. Frenchmen, unable to pronounce the word Cicero correctly, were put to death. The old Norman palace is presently the site of the Sicilian Parliament, one of the oldest in history. The city's imposing cathedral has stood on this spot for 900 years. Other of the city's many churches may have more impressive religious artifacts, but this is where most Palermo Catholics come to worship their Santuzza, Santa Rosalia. The Teatro Massimo, on the aptly named Piazza Giuseppe Verdi, is one of the largest and most acoustically perfect opera houses in Europe. The various quarters of the city grew under different cultural influences. In the Quattro Canti district, the specialty is still marzipan pastry, a delicacy which has an Arabic origin. And in the Calza district, it is common to find a street vendor selling babalucci, tiny snails, marinated in olive oil, garlic, and pepper. Santa Rosalia is Palermo's patron saint. It is believed that in 1624 her bones were found in a cave near this peak, Monte Pellegrino, which became her sanctuary. This is also a marvelous place from which to see the entire city and its world-renowned port. This ancient port, from which ships and sailors have always sailed, and to which ships and sailors and now tourists have always hoped they could return. Sicilians like to say that after God created the earth, he shed tears of joy, and Sicilia is simply one of God's tears. The landscape of the western part of the island is far less stark than the mountainous and volcanic regions to the east. Here, the hills are gentle, the valleys fertile, good grazing and wine country. This is Sicily at her sweetest. When a Sicilian farmer sees stones, he sees both a back-breaking labor and the chance to build something permanent. In his rock-strewn fields, he will create a wall and make it beautiful as well as practical. It has been thus for untold centuries. Even in their most fanciful mythologies, the ancient Greeks could never have envisioned anything like this rising out of the Tyrrhenian Sea. Isola della Femmine, Island of the Women, is the name of both this tiny island and the mainland beyond. The island is kept in its natural state as a wildlife preserve. One legend has it that 13 women accused of infidelity were put out to sea as punishment. They landed here. Years later, when they were exonerated, they refused to leave. They had turned the Isola della Femmine into a paradise. The ancient port city of Trapani, on the northwestern point of the triangular island, shares the same rich and diverse history, Greek, Roman, North African, Spanish, as most other Sicilian cities. It is said that Demeter, the earth goddess of the Greeks, dropped her scythe here and created the sheltering reef that protects Trapani harbor. The Lazzaretto was a reception center for the diseased poor, especially lepers, a colony of which was established near Trapani. But Trapani has long been known as the city of windmills, not because any milling of grain was done here, but because the windmills pumped water out of Trapani's world-famous salt flats. Now, electric pumps extract the seawater. The salt is left to dry in the sun, and the result is the most savory salt in the world. Fishing fleets fill every cove along the western coastline. The prize most often sought is the Mediterranean tuna. founded by Phoenician adventurers. The name of the city actually derives from Arabic, Marsa el Ali, Port of Ali. In fact, Marsala today, with a large Tunisian minority, still retains its strong North African flavor. It was to this harbor in 1860 that Garibaldi and 1,000 red-shirted volunteers arrived to begin their mission of liberating Sicily from foreign rule. By the time they reached Messina on the opposite coast, their numbers had swelled to over 20,000, and Sicily was free. What Trapani is to sea salt, Marsala is to sweet dessert and cooking wine. To be designated a true Marsala, the grapes used must have a high sugar content and be grown, tended and bottled in state-supervised vineyards. Dedicated to Hera, this Greek temple was rebuilt from its own ruins in 1957. It was destroyed by the Carthaginian general Hannibal, who was promised a huge sum from the townspeople to spare their sacred temples. After he received the payment, Hannibal destroyed the temples and then proceeded to slaughter the townspeople. This was the site of a miracle in July 1831, for it was then that an offshore island suddenly emerged from the sea. It was christened Ferdinandia in honor of King Ferdinand of Spain, and then, after 5 months, as suddenly and mysteriously as it had appeared, Ferdinandia was gone. The townsfolk of Sciacca have made sure to check the horizon daily ever since. The climate of the southern or Mediterranean coast of Sicily can be torrid in summer, coming as it does on the hot, prevailing winds, the scirocco from the Sahara. But inland, in the small agricultural towns of Mediterranean Sicily, life goes on pretty much as it always has. Here, life takes its value from the significance of an annual saint's feast day or festa. Agrigento, the largest city on the southern coast, is the birthplace of the famed Greek mystic Empedocles. It was he who first insisted that the heart was the basis of life. He who taught that all matter is composed of earth, air, fire, and water. And he who finally threw himself into the crater at Mount Etna and told his disciples he had been summoned by the gods. The cathedral at Agrigento today stands high above the city, just as sacred temples did in Empedocles' day. In 1934, the Sicilian Luigi Pirandello, poet, novelist, dramatist, was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. This house, on the outskirts of Agrigento, was his birthplace. About his Sicily home he wrote, "A solitary house set in my native countryside, up here on this plateau, above the azure sea. I will always see my home from afar." The author's ashes are buried beneath the withered, lightning-scarred, but still noble Pirandello pine. The Sicilian earth is restless. Even in the fertile central plains, where the earth is most stable, it lies in sharp folds, not certain whether it is really land or a breaking wave. Sicilian ingenuity and brilliant engineering, characteristics as old as the Roman Empire, have mastered the terrain with breathtaking constructions. The central plateau is the breadbasket of Sicily, where hard-working farm families raise much of the island's essentials: the cattle, wheat, corn, and hay. Rare and precious as water is on the island, in the high plateaus there is just enough water for irrigation in the parched summer months. Called the Belvedere of Sicily, Enna, located almost in the geographical center of the island, sits on a high plateau 1,000 meters above sea level. Even though her position seems to make it an impregnable fortress, Enna has also been occupied by foreign armies many times. Above the altar in the Gothic Duomo di Enna is a painting called Christ of the Three Faces, because Christ's expression appears to change depending on the position of the viewer. Here is the ancient city's chief fortification, so old it cannot be dated precisely. Only 6 of its original towers remain. Inland, Sicily abounds with orange and lemon groves. One of the pleasures of the island's warm breezes is their delightful aroma. The air on Sicily is always perfumed citrus. Entering this hilltop cathedral is, as always, an act of faith. Here, it can be a fairly strenuous workout as well. passage through the narrow valleys of Monte Iblie takes us inevitably to the sea, but to a different sea this time, the Ionian on Sicily's east coast. At its height, in the 5th century BC, Syracuse, or Syracusa, founded by Greeks from Corinth, grew to a population of 300,000. For centuries thereafter, populous Syracuse ruled all of Sicily. She became so powerful, in fact, that a long and bitter war broke out between Sicily and Athens itself. The city is actually composed of an island, the Old Quarter, now connected to the mainland by permanent bridges. The city prided itself on its poetic and intellectual tradition. The greatest names from Greek antiquity were drawn here. Plato and Pythagoras spent years in Syracuse, as did the dramatist Aeschylus and the lyric poet Pindar. Syracuse basks in its glorious past. Archimedes was born here. On these very streets, he ran shouting, "Eureka!" after filling his bathtub to the brim, sitting in it, and discovering the law of displacement. But Syracuse is just as proud of being a thoroughly modern city, with a contemporary sense of style. Even Sicily's deep-rooted Catholicism has, in this city, a contemporary expression rare anywhere else on the island. From this port, it is only a short trip eastward across the Ionian Sea to the Italian mainland, or to venture further north along the coastline toward Catania.
Sant'Anna, Donna Cava, alla Vergine Maria, figlia bella la chiamava, alla figliuzza mia, e chiudi l'occhi e a riposa.
The vast plain of Catania, where 3 rivers converge, lies at the foot of Mount Etna. The active volcano's lava, which has destroyed cities and populations, ironically also enriches the soil. The plain of Catania is among the richest farmland in Sicily. This busy port, and Sicily's second largest city after Palermo, is also one of the most blistering places on the island. Summer temperatures regularly exceed 100 degrees. One might wonder why this fortress built to protect the harbor isn't on the harbor. Well, it was on the harbor when it was built in the 17th century, but a great lava flow from Etna pushed the sea back hundreds of yards. An earthquake in the same century all but destroyed the city. As a reminder of Etna's power and as a talisman, lava stones decorate many doorways and monuments in Catania. Catania was almost completely rebuilt, which is why the city is laid out as a modern city in a grid, with wide boulevards and spacious parks. On almost every corner, modern life accommodates antiquity in very surprising ways. The Duomo is dedicated to St. Agatha, patron saint of Catania. In 251 AD, she met her death by fire at the hands of the Romans. Catanians invoke her spirit to protect them from the fiery and arbitrary power of Etna. We approach ancient Naxos, the oldest Greek colony in Sicily, as Theocles did 28 centuries ago. Imagine that placid morning, which may have been very much like this day. As rocky Taormina rises out of the Ionian Sea, she resembles many other quiet, sloping coastal towns, and this was indeed the case years ago. But in recent years, Taormina has lost her tranquility. She has been discovered by the world. Many wealthy foreigners, especially the British and Germans, have built villas here. Taormina Arte, the international summer festival of music, drama, dance and film, has become world famous. Of all Sicilian towns, Taormina is the one most often described as chic. Built originally here by Greeks and enlarged by the Romans, this scenic amphitheatre is the site of many arts festival performances. From the highest seats in the theatre, Mount Etna can be seen towering in the western sky. The volcano and the people who live beneath it have always been antagonists. Yet, in some strange way, they are lovers as well, locked eternally in an embrace of hope and despair, of life and death. Sicilians look to the enigmatic mountain in awe and wonder, knowing, as did Greek and Roman, Spaniard and Arab, that it embodies mysterious forces far more powerful than humans can ever comprehend. Such mysterious power makes Sicilians humble. It also makes them proud.